This case takes place in the USA in the year 2013.
A person was hired to stop criminals, but instead he became one. This is the story of a man who was paid to protect, a man whose job was to prevent theft, uphold rules, and ensure safety inside the walls of a retail giant. While others trusted him to catch thieves, he was stealing behind their backs. And then one morning, that betrayal turned lethal. Another man who came to work early, eager to provide for his growing family, walked straight into a death trap. Meet Bernard Grusha. Bernard was born on the 23rd of March 1975 in New York. Bernard appeared to embody the American dream. He graduated from high school in 1993 and then later earned a degree in criminalistics and criminal science in 1997, and he was able to do this while working a full-time job. While he was juggling these commitments, he met a young woman named Heather. The couple hit it off, and in 1997, the couple got married. They both worked multiple jobs throughout the years, and with their shared finances, they were able to purchase multiple properties, and they were building quite the prosperous life. By 2006, the couple were able to buy a house in Elmer, New York, worth $450,000. But despite having a healthy income from property, Bernard took a job in the retail store Toys R Us in 2007, eventually rising to the role of Regional Loss Prevention Officer with a salary of $90,000. The couple were doing great. However, beneath this facade, financial turmoil brewed. In 2008, Heather was tragically diagnosed with breast cancer, leading to mounting medical bills. Between high medical bills and unchecked spending, they racked up $1.2 million in debt. As a result, the couple filed for bankruptcy in 2009. They sold most of their properties, but retained their home in Elmer and a couple of others. The added financial and emotional pressure must have had a significant strain on their marriage. On the outside, they appeared to be a strong supporting couple. However, occasionally the neighbours reported hearing loud arguments. These escalated several times, with the police responding to domestic disputes on multiple occasions. A situation escalated further on the 8th of June 2013. Heather and Bernard were having an extremely volatile argument. According to law enforcement, Bernard fired a 9mm handgun through a window of their rear home. According to some sources, he apparently did this to pretend that he had done something to himself. Upon hearing the shot fired, Heather rushed into the room to find him on the floor and called the emergency services, only for Bernard to then roll over. Bernard was testing to see if she still really cared for him. Following this, Heather filed for a domestic violence order against him. It stripped him of the right to ever legally own a firearm again, and the order gave her a layer of protection, but it was only on paper. Now, of course, this legal measure indicates a significant strain on their relationship. However, public available information does not provide details about whether or not Bernard formally separated or divorced after this event. But after the bankruptcy, a family member of Bernard came into a large sum of money, and some of this money was then passed on to Bernard. He had escaped the requirement to settle his debts, and now he had money again. But this wasn't enough. Bernard wanted more. Despite his professional role in preventing theft, Bernard exploited his position of power to embezzle over $200,000 worth of merchandise from Toys R Us. He would then take this merchandise and sell the stolen goods online. These thefts were ongoing and systematic, carried out with insider knowledge and access to surveillance systems and the store keys. Bernard thought little of the thieves he caught, not for the crime they committed, but for their incompetency and their inability to steal. He saw himself as superior because he was so effective. In his mind, the petty thieves he once investigated were amateurs, sloppy, predictable. He was different. He was meticulous and invisible, but arrogance can make people reckless, and eventually it led him somewhere darker than theft. In a situation darker than what he had done to his wife. It was someone innocent, someone who had trusted him, a colleague and a father. Meet Larry Wells. Larry was born in New York in 1977. For the last 7 years, he had been the manager at Toys R Us. Colleagues remember Larry as being a big kid at heart, whose enthusiasm for toys and commitment to fostering a family-like atmosphere made him well loved among the employees. He married his high school sweetheart Jill, and together they had a daughter named Madison. On the fateful day in which this case takes place, on the 29th of June 2013, his wife was pregnant with their second child. Larry was filled with immense joy and anticipation during this time. Everyone who knew him, including his colleague, the Regional Loss Prevention Officer, Bernard Gruscher, knew exactly how excited he was for the new addition to his family, making what happened in this case even more tragic and twisted. Embezzling toys, gadgets and teddy bears to sell online was a lucrative business for Bernard, but this carried significant risks. He could have been caught in the act, or caught when he was selling the products on eBay, which was his online vendor of choice. And so he came up with the grand idea that he could cut through the process by stealing directly from the store's safe, for cash. After all, he knew everything there was to know about the security in the store. The Toys R Us he worked at operated with strict discipline, and it was a relatively busy store. Larry Wells would arrive a little before 4 a.m. to oversee the stocking of the merchandise. This was a routine that Bernard knew all too well, and the 29th of June 2013 was like any other day. However, on this day, unbeknownst to him, a sinister plan was unfolding within the store's walls. At 3:55 a.m., Larry and a couple of other employees received a lorry full of toys and goodies, and were preparing to unload them. Larry opened the rear doors in the loading bay. This was to the rear of the building. By 4:30 the truck was emptied, and the warehouse shelves began to be stacked. Bernard knew this procedure. He knew that Larry and the employees were preoccupied in the rear of the building. He knew that he could come to the front and head straight for the safe. So that's exactly what he did. He arrived at Toys R Us at 4:24 a.m., dressed in dark-coloured clothing to disguise his image. He was also wearing a mask. CCTV footage captured Bernard stealthily entering the store. He is seen skulking through the store with a calculated precision, suggesting an intimate knowledge of the store's layout and security. He navigated through the aisles to avoid cameras where possible. He was making sure to walk around the outside of the floor, so he knew he had one side covered by the shelves. He moved from aisle to aisle, hobbling to perhaps hide his natural walking pattern. The CCTV footage also caught a glimpse of what he was holding in his hands throughout this invasion. He was holding a large knife. At 4:32 a.m., he made it to his desired destination, the manager's office. He swiftly disabled the security system by unplugging the DVR unit. What happened next has been determined to be the most likely chain of events. It is suspected that he proceeded to open the safe and steal the shop's profits and float. This couldn't have been more than $10,000. During this time, another worker turned up at the store. He noticed that the building's side door had been opened before the opening time. He thought that this was strange, but he didn't alert anyone. He just cracked on with his day. This employee didn't notice the signs of a break-in. Bernard did have a key, but to cover his tracks, he made the robbery appear like a forced entry. For Bernard, everything was going to plan. That was until Larry was satisfied that the delivery had been managed, and so he turned around and headed to the manager's office to get a jump start on the day's paperwork. When Larry walked into the manager's room, he was shocked to see a man standing there, robbing the safe. Upon seeing this man stood in the manager's office, Larry reacted and tried to apprehend and stop the burglar. In doing so, Bernard's 2007 University of Florida Gators cap flew off his head and onto the ground. This is what he was wearing to conceal his identity. Bernard then reached for his knife in a last-ditch effort to fight off Larry. Bernard swung and stabbed violently and managed to stab Larry in the chest, causing severe blood loss. Upon doing this, Bernard likely panicked, and he escaped the way he came in, but leaving behind his blood-stained hat and the money that he came there to steal. At around 5 a.m, another colleague arrived for his shift and went straight to the front door. This colleague radioed Larry to come and let him in, but there was no answer. So this colleague went round the rear and saw that the side door was opened. He entered the store and punched in his time card. He then started stacking shelves as usual. At this point, there were 4 members of staff inside, plus Larry, but the store was large and people had a job to do. But then, at around 5:45 a.m, the store alarm began to go off. This was deeply confusing, so the members of the team radioed Larry to turn it off. A young female worker was closest to Larry's manager's office, so she entered to see what was going on. This woman immediately started screaming, and the sound echoed throughout the store. To this day, she says it was the worst thing she had ever seen in her life, and that the image still haunts her every single day. She found Larry positioned in his chair in a pool of his own blood, with a stab wound in his chest so severe that at first she thought he had been shot. Other members of the staff assumed that there was an active shooter, and that they might be in the store still, and so all of the staff scrambled out of the store. Emergency services were immediately called. When the police arrived, they created a perimeter around the building and entered with extreme caution. When the officers entered the room where Larry had been, they checked for any signs of life. Despite the blood loss, he was still faintly breathing and he was still alive. Larry was then loaded into an ambulance and the paramedics did everything they could. But tragically, all hope was lost when he succumbed to the traumatic and savage attack. Larry passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The discovery of Larry's body by a fellow employee prompted an immediate investigation. All 4 workers raised serious concerns for the investigators. One appeared to be nervous and shifty under questioning, another arrived late with no clear alibi, and the third was the one who discovered the body. And the last and 4th employee refused to answer any questions and acted incredibly strangely throughout the entire process. Although one thing mattered more than any of their behaviour: something left behind at the scene of the crime. A 2007 University of Florida cap was found on the floor beside the body. Investigators believed it had been accidentally left behind by the killer during a violent struggle. The 4 employees were still suspects at this point, but one detective had the cap sent in for testing, and it came back with DNA evidence. All 4 members of staff were also tested to see if they matched the DNA in the cap, but none of them did. The police needed some help, and so they brought in the store's loss prevention expert to review the security footage and assist with how the store security works. This man was, of course, Bernard. The police had their killer, but they didn't know it yet. Bernard was then tasked with assisting the officers in catching the killer. How he kept his cool whilst working side by side with detectives is beyond comprehension. The office cameras had been shut off, but the rest of the store still had some coverage. In the footage, they could see a man wearing a Florida cap moving through the aisles. He avoided every direct angle. Only the top of his hat ever showed, so at least they knew for sure it was the killer's hat. The community's anxiety grew, fearing the perpetrator might evade justice. The investigators were stunned. They were fearing that the case was going to go cold, and Bernard believed that he had gotten away with it. And for a time, it did seem that Bernard had gotten away with it, but that was until the detectives began to retrace their own steps to see if they had missed something. That was when they realized that they had not yet taken one very important person's DNA, the loss prevention manager, Bernard. This was likely forgotten as he was the go-to guy during the investigation, and by all accounts, Bernard was very cooperative with the police. Whenever they needed him, he was always there. A couple of detectives did actually ask for a DNA sample from Bernard, but every single time, he made a reasonable excuse and was eventually forgotten about. On the 14th of August 2013, the police obtained a sample from Bernard, and around 150 days after the murder, on the 16th of October, the DNA results came back. The DNA results confirmed that Bernard was a match for the gator's hat found at the scene of the crime. The detectives went straight to his home and confronted him on camera, hoping he might slip up or confess. In the footage, it shows Bernard repeatedly claiming that he was innocent, even as they told him the evidence said otherwise. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. When being arrested, Bernard nonchalantly said, "Whatever guys, great. I didn't do it. This is crazy." The community sighed with relief. The Toys R Us killer was finally caught. Bernard was remanded to jail awaiting hearings and eventually the usual trial. However, the trial never came. On the 7th of April 2014, in a turn of events, Bernard was offered a plea deal, to which he accepted. He pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in the county court, and this plea deal reduced the original second-degree murder charge to manslaughter. Now, this of course had some backlash with many members of Larry's family, along with the wider community. They were furious as to the decision to offer a plea deal in the first place, but the prosecutors themselves even acknowledged that it would have been extremely challenging to prove that Bernard had the intent to murder that day. If the case had gone to court, they may have failed in finding him guilty. This way, with a deal, the prosecution maintained a level of control to ensure that he was imprisoned for a long time. The agreement also spared Larry's family of the emotional toll of a drawn-out trial. As part of the plea, Bernard admitted to stealing over $200,000 worth of toys and cash from his employer, Toys R Us. The plea agreement required the defendant to pay restitution to Toys R Us in the amount of $223,000. But throughout the investigations, it came to light that between July 13, 2013 and October 16 of 2013, he was in possession of a pistol despite being the subject of a restraining order issued by Elmer Town Court. He had made false statements to the ATF and had told them that he had gotten rid of his pistol, when in fact he had not. So, at the same time, he pleaded guilty to possession of a firearm by a person subject to a domestic violence order of protection, which carries with it a penalty of 10 years in prison and $250,000 fine. On the 24th of June 2014, the judge sentenced Bernard to the maximum penalty for first-degree murder, 25 years in prison followed by 5 years of probation. During the sentencing, Larry's wife, Jill, delivered a victim impact statement expressing the profound loss experienced by her family. She said, "I lost my husband, my best friend, the man who I love so much. We were supposed to grow old together, raise our children together, and watch them grow up. But instead, he was taken from us. Our daughter, who was 4 at the time, lost the best father she could have. They did everything together. She just doesn't understand how someone could take her father away from her." This was but a mere glimpse into the devastation that Jill and the family felt. During the sentencing in July of 2014, Bernard chose not to address the court. He offered no public expression of guilt or remorse besides his plea, but his defense attorney did say that he was sorry. In the following years following Larry's death, the community has supported the Wells family. On the anniversary of his passing, hundreds of people gathered to write notes to lost loved ones and released balloons into the sky, symbolizing remembrance and solidarity. Jill, his eldest daughter, and his youngest child, whom Larry never got a chance to meet, have maintained their privacy throughout the entire ordeal. The tragic loss of Larry has left a mark on his family and the wider community. The case of the Toys R Us killer highlights the enduring impact of such a senseless act of violence.